Hi, this is National Master Dan Heisman, and we're here with another video to help you improve your chess game. Before we get into today's subject, I'd like to thank the viewers for two things. First, we just hit 10,000 subscribers, so thank you very much. Keep telling your friends to watch the channel. Secondly, the previous video about how to read game books was very, very well received. I got several people saying they discovered the channel through that. I got a lot more views on that one than I usually do. I submitted it for a Chess Journalists of America award. So I'd like to thank you for the feedback and for all the viewers for that. Hopefully that'll help people discover some of the other videos that I did earlier that I think are just as good and just as helpful. And we've had about 389 videos now covering pretty much every aspect of chess improvement. So no matter what you want, openings, middle games, end games, tactics, strategy, positional play, principles, you name it, thought process, evaluation. We've got videos on all those things. We have playlists to help you. So thanks a lot. All right, and today we're going to talk a little bit about opening databases. Now I tell people when you're playing a game, you want to learn at least one new move each game. After the game, you want to go back and look up the game in a database or with an engine or with a book and say, if we play these same moves again, which move would I play better? So for instance, suppose you play e4 and your opponent plays Sicilian and you have no idea how to play the Sicilian. So you play b3 and you say, all right, b3, that looks reasonable. I'm going to fianchetto right through the middle of the board. And you ask the database, and the database over here, well, let's turn on the LiChess master database, and you look for b3 and it's all the way down at 1%. And you say, 1%, how did it do? Well, it didn't do that badly. It won 32%, but it lost 34%. That's not good. And then you could turn on the engine up here at the top and say, oh, the engine says I should have played knight f3 at 0.3. What's the evaluation if I play b3? Ooh, I'm all the way down to minus 0.1. So that means you lost 4/10 of a pawn by playing b3 here. So the engine's kind of telling you you've lost your white advantage if you play that line. It's not a disaster at minus 0.1, but you could probably do better next time by playing knight f3 at 0.3. All right, so the database, the engine, the book, they can help you at least play a new move each time you play a game. You learn one more move, and you're trying to build up your opening knowledge. You're building up what we call your tabias, your standard lines. You look at a standard line like the main line of the Roy Lopez. I have a 4-part video on all these different things. I have a video on how to study openings, a video on how to find tabias, a video on how to use databases. Today we're going to talk about databases, but we're pretty much going to concentrate on the difference between the LiChess master database, which is a lot like the chess.com Explorer database, where it's got all the strong players' games and how they did, what percentage of the time people played certain moves, how good those moves did. And the LiChess database, which is very interesting, it's a database of the average players and how well they did. For instance, you can't see it over here, but in the master database, if white plays e4, 43% of the games are drawn. It's just outside of what you can see. I don't want to move the video back and forth. You just take my word for it. If you look at the LiChess database, then the percent of games that are drawn when white plays e4 drops from 43% to about 4%. So that's a pretty big difference. And there's a lot of big differences between what average people play and what strong players play. And you can use that to your advantage, and that's what today's video is going to be about a little bit. So let's take a look at some of the things that you can learn from doing that. Let's go back to our example we just gave with the Sicilian. Let's say you're an e4 player, and you're pretty happy when people play e5, but other things that they play you're not so sure of. So let's say they play Sicilian and you go, gee, I don't want to learn all those open Sicilians with knight f3 and d4 for white, where white plays knight f3 on the second move and then d4 on the third move. So I'm going to play the Alapin Sicilian c3. And you look at the master database and you say, okay, master database, what percent of the time was that played? And it says 6% of the time masters played. Well, if it was 0, you'd start to worry. At 6%, well, the fact that 6% of strong players are willing to play c3 means it can't be completely bad. And if you look at the engine at the top here, c3 doesn't make the top 3 moves. Right now, if you play knight f3, you're at point 3. If you play c3, then if black knows what he's doing, he can equalize at about 0.0. All right, so if you do play c3 and you're studying this out of a book or something, it's going to tell you that black's best reply is to, now that you can't play your knight to c3 and guard your e-pawn, black's best replies are to attack that e4 pawn. How can black attack the e4 pawn right away? Black should play either d5 or knight f6. Those are the two main moves. And if we look at the database, down there on the lower right, let me highlight them in green, you can see knight f6 was the most popular move by stronger players at 44%, and d5 was 33%. So over 3/4 of the time, a strong player attacked that e-pawn with d5 and knight f6. So if you're playing strong players, those are the lines you want to prepare for in games, because that's what they're going to play 3/4 of the time. But suppose you're playing average players. What would they play? That's where we're going to click the button here on the LiChess database. And now you can see that d5 and knight f6 are not in the top 3. So the two best moves, or at least the two most popular moves that masters played, are not played by amateur players. d5 is only played 14% of the time, and knight f6 is only played 10% of the time. What's the number one move? It's knight to c6. Well, knight to c6 is actually a minor mistake. If we go back to the master database after c3, you can see knight c6. Knight f6 is number 1, d5 is number 2, e6 is number 3, d6 is number 4, g6 is number 5, and so on, and down to 1%. Knight c6 is nowhere. Why? Because it doesn't stop white from playing d4. When white plays d4, black's only got 2 pieces on it. Let's play that move, knight c6. Black's only got 2 pieces on it, and white already has 2. So that means when white plays d4, that the knight c6 did not stop d4. Not only does knight c6 not stop d4, but now white has a positional threat of playing d5 in some lines. So for instance here, let's just make some bad moves for black. Let's say black plays e6 to try to stop that, and white plays knight f3. And black says, oh, I heard you play a6 in Sicilians. Now if you play d5, already the computer's saying it's at 1.2, meaning if white plays perfectly from this position, he's practically winning. For instance, on pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, the knight can't go to the middle. If the knight blunders and plays knight e7, this is a famous trap. You hit the knight, and when he saves the knight, you just check him. And all the ways he gets out of check, he has to lose a piece. So already black's losing the game. Well, is that forced from knight c6? No, of course not. I played some bad moves for black. But the point is, knight c6 does not stop d4. So masters never play that move. It doesn't make any sense. But yet, it's the most popular move in the database here. Let's go back to the LiChess database. So you can see knight c6 is number 1 by far. It's at 31%. The second most popular move is d6. Well, knight c6 and d6 are the kind of moves you play against knight f3, but they're not the kind of moves that you play against c3. So this also tells you that if you play the Alapin Sicilian in amateur tournaments, then you're probably going to expect people to not know it, and they're not going to play very well, and you're probably going to get a decent opening advantage out of c3, where if you're playing really strong players, you're not getting much of an advantage at all. So c3 is a better opening to play when you're rated, let's say, 1300 and your opponent's 1300, than if you're 2300 and your opponent's 2300. But the important point here is, how did I use the master database and the LiChess database to figure that out? Let's take another popular idea. Let's look at the fried liver attack. A lot of people think that knight g5 in the 2 knights defense is the fried liver attack. How do I know that? Because I've asked them. So here we are, knight f6. So here white plays knight g5. Knight g5, as you can see from the database, is the most popular move in the LiChess database. In the master database, it's probably d3. Knight g5 is second. Knight g5 is the older move, and it's been well analyzed, but it's not the fried liver attack. They call it the knight attack. I call it the classical variation. Knight to g5. And now, of course, black has to play d5 to block the attack on f7. and white takes. And now it's a famous idea that black can't take the pawn with the knight. That's a beginner mistake. I did that in my third tournament, and I got crushed taking the pawn. My opponent played the lolly d4 against me, which is a good move and won. And of course, if people do play knight takes d5, you can not only play the lolly, which is what I was just telling you, but knight takes f7. This is the fried liver. Knight g5 is not the fried liver. The fried liver is only when black makes the mistake of taking the pawn with the knight. If he doesn't take that pawn, this is not the fried liver. But if he takes the pawn and white plays knight f7, this by definition is the fried liver attack. And you can, well, you can't see it because it's a little off the screen there, but it does say Italian game 2 knights defense fried liver attack. Knight takes f7. But if you look at the master database, nobody plays knight takes d5 unless they're, trying to experiment with something crazy. Knight a5 which is the engine's #1 move, is played 87% of the time. And if you look at the top under the engine says knight a5 is 0-0, b5, which was played by Berliner against Estrin in the World Correspondence Championship back in the late 1960s, is 0.3, and knight d4 is number 3. Knight takes d5 is considered an inaccuracy. Right here, 0-0 if you play it right. If you play knight takes d5, it drops all the way down to 0.7. And the computer says the fried liver or the lolly, knight f7 or d4, are both good for white if black does that. Well, how often will people do that? Well, if you're playing someone strong, nobody's going to play knight takes d5. In the database, it's basically close to 0. But if we go to the LiChess database for amateurs, knight takes d5 is actually the most commonly played move. In over 22 million games played in the database, 9.5 million games, 43%, black played knight takes d5, the mistake, the same thing I did in my third tournament. Knight a5 is the second most common move, just behind it at 42% instead of 43%. So it says half the people are going to fall into this and half of them won't. So if you're playing this line for white, you can study this line and say, oh, what do I do if people mess up and play knight takes d5 here? Because you're going to get into either a lolly or fried liver attack, whichever you want to study. If you want to study the fried liver attack, then you study what happens after knight takes f7. For instance, king takes, queen checks, king e6, knight c3, knight b4. And now when I was a kid, the main line here was to play a3, but you can see the engine doesn't even have a3 in the top 3. The best line and the most commonly played in the master database is now castles, which gives white about a 0.5 advantage. You can see at depth 42. So castles is now #1 in this position. And, white's down a piece, but the black king's caught in the middle, and white has good attack, good chances in the center. Obviously, if you're playing against the engine here, and the engine's black, he's going to be able to trickily defend the position all right, but most humans have trouble defending these kind of positions. All right, so enough on the database, but the whole point there is the database is telling you that a lot of people will play knight takes d5. Let's look at another inaccuracy that people do. Let's say you play d4 and people play d5 and you play c4. The three main moves here, by far, let's go back into the master database, are to play a pawn move, the Slav c6, the queen's gambit decline e6, and the queen's gambit accepted d takes c4. If we look at the database, c6 is played half the time, e6 is played 34%, a third of the time, and d takes c4 is played about an eighth of the time. If we add up the c6, e6, and d takes c4 percentages in the master database, it comes out to 96% of the time. So if you're teaching someone how to defend this position, how to defend the queen's gambit, and they can't remember what to do here, the hint is it's going to be a pawn move. You're either going to guard that pawn with a pawn or you're going to take his pawn 96% of the time. And if we look at the engine agrees the three best moves for black are the queen's gambit decline e6, the Slav c6, and d takes c4. So the master database, as it should, agrees with the engine that that's the best moves for black. But a lot of times beginners don't understand, and they play an inaccurate move. They play knight f6. Now you could look in the master database, and knight f6 is like almost never played. And if you look at the engine, what happens on knight f6, it jumps way up and says, if you take the pawn, they shouldn't even take it back. The engine says, don't take it back, just ignore it. Excuse me. Most people take it back, and now a lot of people play e4 here, which is a good move. But I was taught to play knight f3, which the engine agrees is the best move. In the master database, most people play e4, but the people who taught me and the engine both agree, you play knight f3 here to stop them from playing e5 in some lines, and then you play e4, and this is really, 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 really good for white. But good players know this, and they would never play this for black. But if we look at the database here, the master database says they're never going to do this. Sorry, we got to go back a move. They're never going to do this. But let's go to the LiChess database. In the LiChess database, 16% of the people fell into this. They played knight f6 here when someone played c4. So 1/6, if you're a d4 c4 player and you play the Queen's Gambit like this, 1/6 of the time someone's going to play this Marshall defense, and if you know how to play against it, you're going to get a nice advantage. If we do it from a different move order, let's say we do d4 and knight f6 and then c4, they can transpose into the bad Marshall by playing d5. And again, if we look at the master database, nobody plays d5. It's not in the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, not in the top 8. But if we go to the LiChess database, now d5 is the 5th most common move, and it's played 8% of the time. So even with this move order, 8% of the time someone plays the wrong move here and allows you to take advantage of that. So again, the master database is showing you the difference. Let's try something else. Let's say you're learning the French defense, and the master database says the main move is knight c3. 50% of the time people play knight c3. 32% of the time they play the Tarrasch knight d2. And only 11% of the time are they going to play e5. But suppose you're playing someone who's just an average Joe on chess.com or on LiChess. Now it turns around completely. Knight c3, which is the #1 move by the engine, and it's the #1 move in the master database, is only played 21% of the time. And the Tarrasch is just not a move that usually occurs to amateurs unless someone shows it to them. So that's played even less. That's played 9% of the time in the LiChess database. So that's not as common. On the other hand, e5, which is the move that is only 3rd best at 11%. Let's go back to the master database. Whoops, didn't mean to click on that. If we go back to the master database, e5 is only played 11% of the time, but in the LiChess database against the amateurs, it's the most common move at 35% of the time. So if you're studying the French and you're wondering what people are going to play against you, if you're playing really strong players, they're probably not going to play the advanced variation. But if you're playing a weaker player, the chances are more likely they'll play that than anything else. How about the exchange variation, pawn takes pawn? That's the 2nd most common at 30%. So 35% and 30% is 65%. Almost 2/3 of the time, someone will take the pawn or play e5. If you're playing them in the master database against a strong player, it's only 11 and 6%. So where it's 2/3 of the time with amateurs, it's only 1/6 of the time when you're playing strong players that they're going to play e5 or e takes d5. All right, let's do a couple more examples and we'll call it a day. Let's look at the Vienna Gambit. So suppose you say, I like to play e4, and when people play e5, I'm learning the Vienna. And if they play the knight f6, I play the Vienna Gambit because a lot of people fall for this. And the trap is that they take the pawn, and then you push the pawn, and the knight has nowhere to go except back. In fact, if they pin it with the queen and you unpin it with your queen, it's even worse. After knight g5, the engine says white can play knight f3 or d4 with practically a winning position already. And even if they move the knight back right away and don't bring the queen out, and white plays knight f3 then to stop the queen check, then white's advantage is very large. It's already at 0.6. A normal advantage would be 0.2 or 0.3. So that's sort of a trap. And it's interesting because if people play the king's gambit, then you definitely want to take the pawn. It's the best move by far. So people think that if they run into the Vienna gambit, that they should also take the pawn. Well, just because you take it in the king's gambit doesn't mean you should take it in the Vienna gambit. So here, black's best move by far is d5. And if you look at the master database, d5 is played 97% of the time. And if you look at the engine, d5 gives black a nice little advantage, which is why grandmasters don't play the Vienna gambit. And the second best move gives white an advantage. Second best move is d6. But if we look at the LiChess database, 36% of the time, the plurality of the time, which means the majority, not the majority, but more than any other time it's played. The majority means more than 50%. The plurality means more than any other. So the plurality of the time, black plays e takes f4, which means more than any other single move here, black falls into this trap when they play that. Well, what does that tell you? It tells you if you're at the high level of play, you don't want to play this because people play d5 and already white's the one who's fighting to get equality. While if you're playing at the lower levels, not that many people know to play d5. In fact, d5 isn't even the second most common played move. It's d6. And d5 is the third most common move at 18%. So only 18% are going to play it the only way that gives you any problems. So again, this is a perfectly good opening. They always tell you, when you're an amateur, don't necessarily play the openings that the grandmasters play. And I think today's video showing you the difference between the master database and the LiChess database helps explain why that's true. All right, let's see here. So to summarize, you can use the master database and the LiChess database to figure out, based on your opponent's average ratings, what you can expect people to play against you. And that's very helpful when you're learning openings, because people say to me, well, I learned opening, then people didn't play what I learned. Well, that's always going to happen anyway. You're going to learn the mainline tabia, and then you're going to play weak players, and they don't know the tabia, so they're going to play other stuff. Sometimes when they play other stuff, the other stuff they're playing is perfectly good. Sometimes what they're playing is not so good. And, you know, if you don't know what to do, you just sit there and analyze and do the best you can. And then after the game, you get out your engine and your database and you say, oh, okay, I could done even better to try to take advantage of what they did. But you can't get upset about that because, you know, you can't memorize an entire game. So almost every game you're going to ever play, somebody's going to play something you don't know what to do against. Now, what's the exception to that? Like maybe at my level, maybe less than 1% of the time, somebody's going to fall into an opening trap and resign, and the whole game you'll say, oh, I played 13 moves a book, and then they played a bad 11th move, and the 12th and 13th book moves were what you do against that if they play it badly, and then it's a trap and you win the game by move 13, and therefore I knew the whole game. But that's so rare. You're almost every game you're going to be taken out of your book, so you can't panic. I've had people say, oh, I studied the line and then someone didn't play what I studied and then I panicked. Well, if it's going to happen almost every game, you don't want to get in the habit of panicking. It's not a good idea. Just roll up your sleeves and say, hey, I'm not 100% sure what to do if they do that move. Let's start thinking. And at that point, you play chess the rest of the way. All right, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please tell your friends about the channel. You can subscribe. You can like the video. But the best thing to do is tell people about the channel, Dan Heisman Chess. Thanks a lot. We'll see you next time. Bye.